Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me dio dos luceros que cuando los abro, perfecto distingo lo negro del blanco, y en el alto cielo su fondo estrellado, y en las multitudes el hombre. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me ha dado el sonido y el abecedario, con las palabras que pienso y declaro, madre, amigo, hermano, y luz alumbrando la ruta del alma del que estoy amando. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me ha dado la marcha de mis pies cansados, con ellos anduve ciudades y charcos, playas y desiertos, montañas y llanos, y la casa tuya callé en tu patio. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me dio el corazón y agita su marco cuando miro el fruto del cerebro humano, cuando miro el vuelo tan lejos del malo, cuando miro el fondo de tus ojos claros. Gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto, me ha dado la risa y me ha dado el llanto, así yo distingo dicha de quebranto, los dos materiales que forman mi canto y el canto de ustedes, que es el mismo canto, y el canto de todos, que es mi propio canto. Gracias a la vida, gracias a la vida, gracias a la vida. Gracias a la vida.
Wow, our speakers and our music, it's been fabulous. Wow. So we're coming to our fourth speaker. Last but not least, we're so happy to have Gloria La Riva, who was born and raised in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She became an activist while attending Brandeis University. Gloria is first vice president of the Pacific Media Workers Guild, CWA Local 39521. She is a longtime anti-war and community activist and was the 2020 presidential candidate for the Peace and Freedom Party in California and in 14 other states for the Party for Socialism and Liberation. She has been a longtime supporter of Cuba's revolution and the Bolivarian Revolution of Venezuela. Welcome, Gloria.
Thank you so much. I want to thank all the organizers of this forum and the Ecumenical Peace Institute. It brings me back to my memories living in Rochester, New York, where my in-laws sadly both passed away, but they were both very active in the Ecumenical Peace Institute and in Calc in the 60s and the 70s, or actually in Calc, clergy and laity concerned. So that's really, I'm glad to be here with you all. And about Venezuela, I think that when you talk about Venezuela, it also is linked so much with the fate of Cuba. And the US government understands this, and it's why their sanctions has been particularly harmful to both and very severe against Venezuela and Cuba. Blockade, I agree very much with Lorenzo Cañizares that the word embargo is wholly inadequate, that in fact the blockade is better to describe an internationally enforced war, economic war by the United States. And that is also true for Venezuela. I think that the new history of Venezuela began in 1998 with the election of Hugo Chavez. 1998 ended what was called the Fourth Republic. The Fourth Republic from 1958 to 1998 was a pact between two parties, the ADECO and the COPEI, which were in agreement that they would switch power between one and the other, kind of like Democrats and Republicans. And what took place in those years was a growing control by US oil companies and British, but mainly US, in which 80% of the population was either poor or extremely poor, because all of the oil profits were leaving the country for the coffers of US and British oil companies. Living in a sea of oil, it's recognized that Venezuela has the largest reserves of oil in the world by far, but also great sources in as yet unmined gold, bauxite, many, many other minerals, and a huge source of water. Anyway, in 1998, Hugo Chavez's electoral victory was an enormous shock to the United States. And ever since then, when he took office in 1999 and put his hand on the Constitution at that time, saying that upon this moribund, this dead Constitution, that he would see a new Constitution that very year, a new People's Constitution, the first of 26, the first one to be ratified and actually written by a constituent assembly, ratified by the people with an overwhelming majority, in which housing, healthcare would be guaranteed, that the resources of the country would be in the hands of the people through control of the state. And that oil has been used to provide social projects of education. The illiteracy was wiped out soon after the beginning of this Bolivarian revolution by the introduction of Cuban teachers and the free healthcare. With right now what is taking place is 23,000 Cuban doctors provide a whole network of healthcare for free to the Venezuelan people. In exchange, Venezuela has been providing oil, although that has been blocked lately, and I'll say more about that. The construction of more than 3.3 million homes. I have been to those homes. I'll show a little video if I can of just a short shot of one of the neighborhoods of those amazing homes. But the US economic war and other attempts at overthrowing the Bolivarian revolution began immediately. Yet the democratic project of the revolution was very outstanding. Of 25 elections and referenda in the country since 1999, the Bolivarian people and the government have lost only 3. The last one was the most significant one. It was December 15, 5 years ago, in which the supermajority was won by the right wing, which was intent on trying to unravel all the social gains and overturning the progressive laws that had been passed in years previously. But it was blocked by the declaration, the basic declaring null and void of the National Assembly. And this coming December 6th, 5 years later, is going to be the new election campaign, the new election for electing the new members of the National Assembly, in which the United Socialist Party of Venezuela hopes to gain a majority along with its allies. But this severe economic blockade that occurred really intensified, began with President Obama and his declaration of Venezuela to be a national security threat in March of 2015. That gave the legal basis for the US, which actually is not legal, it's a violation of international law, but under US law, it became the basis for what has taken place since then. Intensifying the sanctions, seizing Venezuela's oil in the United States, which is Citgo Petroleum, all the profits, seizing the gold in banks and the money, billions of dollars of gold and dollars that Venezuela has, including 14 tons of gold in the British Bank, Bank of London, in the Portuguese Bank, and others. Of course, it intensified in 2017. And then the US aggression that we're more familiar with, because finally we started to see more news about Venezuela in 2019, when this pretender imposed by the United States, Juan Guaido, a decided right-winger, a plotter to try to, and he's called even for the invasion of his own country by US troops. He declared himself president, although never having run. But using that cover, the United States has seized the great wealth of the country, which is estimated at about $130 billion of this wealth. And so the country is being strangled. It has affected severely the people's ability. Gasoline is almost non-existent now in the country. And as the elections approach for the December 6th National Assembly elections, what has usually happened in these elections is that the US and the foreign corporations, the Venezuelan counter-revolutionary corporations, have worked together to create more shortages, to jack up the prices. The inflation of the dollar and the bolivar, which is their currency, is pretty shocking. In 1 week, ending a few days ago, in only 1 week, the inflation increased another 30% to where now it takes 700,000 bolivares to $1 US. What the country has done in 4 years since 2016 under President Maduro is to institute a government-wide, nationwide policy to assure that people have food delivered to their homes, to avoid the contraband that was taking place in subsidized stores. And instead, 6 million families out of a 30 million population, that's about 10 million people, anybody who asks for it can apply to be a recipient of the CLAP, the CLAP food program, in which people get delivered a substantial amount of food every month. They were attempting to double it to every 15 days, but it's been hard because, in particular, the subsidized food that's imported is blockaded and sanctioned by the United States. I have 2 short videos I'd like to show if I can. They're very, very short. They're just a few minutes in my time. But I think that this claim in the New York Times, the liberal newspaper, which has been the worst in coverage and providing lies about Venezuela and justifying the US sanctions, in saying, almost presenting Venezuela like people are crawling through the streets, starving. I was there for over a month in January and in February, March, when this US aggression with Guaido was taking place. And I traveled throughout the country. I was also at the bridge, one of the 3 bridges, where the US was pretending to bring in humanitarian aid, but it was really on February 23rd, after a month of Guaido's proclamation, it was really an attempt to see if they could break up the unity of the military, calling on the military to defect, that the US would use it as a battering ram for internal and external invasion. That failed. The military is highly loyal to the Bolivarian Revolution, to the Constitution, and to President Maduro. Things have been very hard. I have many friends who are talking about the shortages. And so there are a number of measures that the country is undertaking now, and that is to try to counter the US war on the oil industry. Iran has been helping. Earlier in the summer, they delivered in several shiploads of oil because the US, using its extremely powerful economic and financial power, sanctioned all the ships that were delivering oil on a regular basis from Venezuela to Cuba in exchange for those doctors. 30 shipments. That's an act of war. We should understand how violent the US has been all over the world, but in particular between Venezuela and Cuba. That's an act of war. And Cuba didn't retire its doctors from Venezuela, but Iran delivered or sent 4 ships. The US seized those ships this fall and openly sold the oil on those ships to the tune of $40 million under orders of the Department of Justice to provide this fund for the counter-revolutionary forces. Citibank continued that plunder by a request by Guaido, this pretender. $342 million was seized from Citibank account that is Venezuela's resources and sent it over to the Federal Reserve to dispatch to the right wing. This hurts the people. And this is why people like Guaido and all his allies are really traitors to their population. So with this war, Venezuela has just passed what is called the anti-blockade law. And it's intended to look abroad for foreign investment to help start up the economies that have been frozen, basically. And that includes countries that are being welcomed to invest, countries that are really less subject to sanctions and pressure from the United States. They are affected by sanctions, but they have a very independent view with respect to the United States because they're targeted as well. And those countries are China, Russia, Iran, Turkey, and of course Cuba, which is a solid ally of Venezuela. Sorry for the noise out in the street. So this is a major development with the potential ability of the country to have more control of its resources to enable a startup of frozen and stopped industries, as Cuba did in 1993 with its opening to foreign investment in order to, as they put it, save the social gains of free healthcare, free education. That's what Venezuela is intending with this. And yet, just recently, a few days ago, Elliot Abrams announced, and he, by the way, with his horrific fascistic policies in Central America in the 1980s, he was named as the US Special Envoy to Venezuela by Trump, in which he announced that this one remaining practice of Venezuela to bring in diesel fuel that they need for the heavy food transport, the heavy trucks that transport food and other essential items, gasoline and oil throughout the country, that provides for their irrigation and their water treatment plants, their sewage treatment plants. All of this is needed to be operated with diesel fuel. So Venezuela has been importing diesel fuel by exporting its oil, which again has been hampered greatly, the production. And Elliot Abrams just announced the shutdown of that importation of diesel fuel by pressuring other countries. It's very, very severe. But I want to say that I'm so impressed by the strength of the people, by their resilience, as we see of the Palestinians who will never give up their struggle for self-determination. And I want to add to that wonderful speech by Reverend Atik that the Palestinian people who live abroad, those in the diaspora, should be allowed to return home. It is their right and even recognized by the United Nations General Assembly, but they should have the right to come home. And anyway, the resilience of people around the world, from the Haitians, Palestinians, certainly the Cubans, and in Venezuela as well. It's a hard struggle, but to give up their struggle would mean another takeover of this vast oil and resources by the United States, by Canada, Britain, and other imperialists. And they're just not going to accept that. It is a country in which the people have a great pride in their long history against Spanish colonialism and US imperialism. I'd like to show two videos, very short, if I can. And one is, I cut these way down, but they give you a glimpse of some people in Venezuela, as well as some scenes from a prison. I traveled to 4 and I visited, including in the cells of the men's and women's prisons in the western part of the country. They were truly hellholes before President Chavez and Maduro. And Chavez instituted in 2011 a new ministry in the service of penitentiaries to humanize the prison system. And I was really amazed by the scenes there. You'll see women in the start of this video. I'll start that first. You'll see women in a marching kind of exercise that really provides some discipline for them. They told me themselves, these women, that they had suffered so much from brutality by the guards, brutality among themselves, what they called gladiator fights, because so little was provided to them. And you'll see this different spirit of the women in this 2 minutes. I will show that. And I will share the screen if it's okay. Let me make it bigger.
Nos encargamos de ensamblarlos, de lijarlos, de, bueno, ponerle la gomalaca, del secado, de todo lo que respecta a ello. Para ser maestro, como 10 años, por lo menos, para especializarse en la materia. Pero, pues nosotras en menos de un año, este es nuestro primer violín elaborado. Para llevarlo afuera. En la Cuarta República fuimos excluidos, ahora somos incluidos, tenemos participación protagónica. Eso es lo que otros países no lo ven. Esto es un modelo socialista. Estos son ideales de Simón Bolívar, que los sacó a la luz como Rafael Chávez Frías, que lastimosamente él cumplió aquí, ¿verdad?, su parte terrenal, pero para eso está Nicolás Maduro y todo su equipo de trabajo, que yo confío en ellos, como confío plenamente en Dios, para seguir el legado del presidente. Y muchos otros proyectos que se van a crear en Venezuela. Pero necesitamos que nos dejen trabajar. Necesitamos que, bueno, lo digo con responsabilidad propia, Carolina Salcedo, necesitamos que los presidentes, como el presidente de Estados Unidos, dejen trabajar esta revolución. Porque esto es de Chávez, esto es Chávez, esto es primeramente Dios, luego Simón Bolívar, luego Chávez, ahí está Nicolás Maduro dando la cara con nosotros. Entonces necesitamos eso, necesitamos más trabajo, necesitamos que nos permitan trabajar.
And the second video, there's a lot more to that, and I'm making a video of it, but I want to just make this short. And the second video is a tiny bit about the food program and their housing. You can just see one neighborhood. There are thousands of apartment buildings here, modern, beautiful, accessible to the people. And here is a tribute to Hugo Chavez. This is a fruit of Chinese-Venezuelan cooperation of the civilian military union. In other words, the workers and the military helped to build this magnificent city here of housing.
Tuvimos alrededor de un mes, creo, más o menos, por ahí de lluvia, que eso era día y noche, fue bajando y cuando nosotros pagamos la chubasca. Yo pedí todo mi coroto y todo eso, pero le doy muchas gracias a mi presidente porque este departamento me lo dieron con todo equipado, y eso yo lo agradezco.
Más del 73% del presupuesto de la nación es un presupuesto que está destinado al tema del aporte social. Nosotros lo vemos como una inversión social, no lo vemos como una dádiva al pueblo, no lo miramos como una obligación al gobierno, lo vemos como la inversión social que un gobierno de corte socialista, de corte progresista, puede llevar adelante en función de garantizar los mejores estadios de nuestra patria.
More than 6 million families receive large quantities of food on a subsidized basis every month.
Mientras en el mercado un kilo de pollo tiene el costo de 10.000 bolívares soberanos, en este momento la comuna está distribuyendo a más de 1.000 familias, está distribuyendo un combo de un pollo que oscila entre 2 y 3 kilos, carne y huevos por tan solo el costo de 1.000 bolívares soberanos. Es decir, que es totalmente asequible los CLA trabajando en el tema de la resistencia económica para lograr de que lleguen alimentos a bajo costo subsidiados totalmente por el Estado.
Ya adelante llevaron los pollos, los huevos y la carne, proteína para cada una de nuestras comunidades. Así que la ayuda humanitaria que nos iba a mandar Trump, que se la come solito, pues nosotros no la necesitamos. El pueblo venezolano tiene su gobierno bolivariano, que es el que nos ampara a todos, hombres, mujeres y niños, y extranjeros y venezolanos, no nada más los venezolanos. Estamos claros en eso. Y que viva Maduro y viva nuestro presidente Nicolás Maduro.
So that's a couple of the scenes. If things go smoothly, I will be in Venezuela reporting on the elections on December 6th and providing an update with video and articles from there. But the main thing is that I have a link to read. I've just put it in the chat, and it is a reading resource because the biggest problem for people understanding what's going on with respect to all these countries on this forum, and especially here with Venezuela, is that the media has just completely distorted the reality. And so this reading list provides alternative media source, both in Spanish and English, really excellent, from Venezuela, from independent journalists who are writing details. And you can read about that, also about Cuba. But in general, I think it's just a very fresh look at what's really taking place. And I think with respect to the Biden administration that will be coming in, I think it remains to be seen what happens, because Biden has said he would return some measures that were instituted by Obama with respect to Cuba. But I think the Democrats do not have any plans, from what we can see, of lightening up on the sanctions against Venezuela, which ultimately affects Cuba too. It will take not only the issue internationally, but our right to housing at home, to stop the evictions that are looming for millions of people in the US. We know our situation, the crisis of almost 240,000 people who are dead, no national plan, no national healthcare plan. We should be able to see beyond the media blockade to see what Cuba and Venezuela have done so remarkably in spite of very intense blockade. Thank you again to everyone, and I appreciate sharing this panel with you all.